Hello and welcome, I'm ELD and we are going over all of the blue cards from Kaldheim in order, starting with Absorb Identity. These are all of the spoilers. We're going to have a general slant of assessing it for your pre-release pool, but also for some of our favorite formats, Legacy, Pauper, Commander. Not really going to care too much about Standard. It's not really my thing, and I don't generally encourage people to play it as your cards eventually rotate out. And in my experience, Standard Magic players tend to have a life cycle of about two rotations. Like, they make it through the first one, and then when all of the original cards rotate out, they're pretty much just done. So, yay for eternal formats. That is, I think, the way Magic is best enjoyed. So, Absorb Identity, starting out at 1 and a blue for an instant. You return a creature to its owner's hand, and you can have shapeshifters you control become copies of that creature until end of turn. That's the type of thing people are going to have fun with in Commander. All sorts of goofiness, potential shenanigans that can be used with this to copy just all sorts of powerful effects. I don't know how people will best use this. Probably won't actually be super good, but I'm sure people will brew, and that's a unique effect. And those are the type of things that I think are worth really looking at if you're going to kind of spend some brain power on cards. Is you're looking for unique effects, you're looking for card drawing, you're looking for low casting cost cards, things that, like creatures that you can potentially, if we're talking vintage, that you could oath out, though that bar has been set super high. So this is the type of card that I would not mind spending some time thinking about, where I just kind of play around with the spoilers. Here, not sure what the name on this one's going to be, but it's going to basically be a Boomerang at 1 and a blue instead of double blue, non-land permanent, to its owner's hand. And you can also foretell this, so you'll be able to pay it for only 1 blue later on. Of course, that is an additional overall cost. You can just pay 2 up front, or you can pay 2 and then a blue later, which is interesting design space, I would say. Alrund, God of the Cosmos, a 5 casting cost 1/1, but he gets a +1/+1 for each card in your hand, and each foretold card you own in exile. So he is going to be potentially pretty beefy, very good friends with Reliquary Tower as well. And at the beginning of your end step, you choose a card type, reveal the top 2 cards of your library, and put all of the cards chosen into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So you can name card type being instant sorcery, creature, land, planeswalker. You're potentially getting 2 cards out of this guy, growing his stature, and not too difficult to set up. I mean, that is a really powerful effect in terms of card advantage, and it really needs to be when you're talking about paying 5 mana for a creature. It's a little bit of a win more effect in that you're generally not going to be super happy with this guy. 5 mana for a 1/1 and potentially whiffing off the top. But when things are going well, he's going to be quite the front runner. Now, conversely, you can play him as Haka Whispering Raven, a 2 casting cost 2/3, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you return it to your hand and then scry 2. And that's a very interesting effect here. So you're getting a undercosted flyer, 2 mana for a 2/3, certainly undercosted when it has wings. Even on the ground, that's just good to have a 2/3 for 2 for the most part for limited. But here, certainly can stick around and block all day if they've got opposing flyers, or if you get it in there, you'll have the opportunity to play on the front side of the card, and you get the scry out of it. So this card seems totally fine, as you'd expect most mythics to be playable when you get them in your pre-release pool, if they're in the colors, if not the reason for you to go whatever colors you ultimately choose. Alrund's Epiphany, 7 mana, and we create 2 1/1 bird creature tokens with flying, but the most important part here is taking an extra turn after this one, and it's got a foretell of 6, so we can pay 2 to reduce the cost, and overall we're paying more mana, which is something we're noticing here in blue, is foretell in blue overall hasn't been quite the bargain that it has been in some of the other colors, but here I expect this card to be really solid. I would not be surprised if this ends up being a $10 card or more down the line, as you are getting extra turns, and pretty much all the extra turn cards end up being worth something. The two 1/1 birds, I mean, don't seem like super relevant. That's more of a flavor thing. Odin had 2 ravens, and that's what they're kind of doing an homage to here. But yeah, extra turns are solid, and even things like Temporal Trespass at this point ended up being worthwhile. So I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being super cheap for a while, and ultimately ends up gaining some value as people kind of dabble in the dark side, playing Commander and having a full table, but playing solo, which is ultimately what extra turn effects tend to turn into there. A null target creature, counter target artifact or enchantment has been around since like Urza's Saga, I believe. I think it was Urza's Saga. This effect has been a playable sideboard card at times, even like in Vintage. So it's fine. I like the art. Nice update. Not too much to say there. Doesn't change anything. Not a new rarity or anything. Ascendant Spirit. This one's really interesting to me. 1 blue for a 1/1, and it has a little bit of a feel of Figure of Destiny from Eventide, but notable that this actually just keeps getting bigger, whereas Figure kind of capped out making itself an 8/8. Here you can actually keep activating that final ability. So we're going to go 2 snow mana to become a 2/3, which is reasonable given that you have an upside, and then 3 additional snow mana once he becomes a Spirit Warrior. Then you're going to get flying and have a base toughness 4/4, and then if Ascendant Spirit is an angel, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and it gains whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So it's going to go from a 4/4 to a 6/6 with those counters, but you can actually do that again and again, making it so you're going to get multiple triggers, and I think that's really interesting. That's a solid mana sink, and the fact that you can do this, during an end step, I mean, that's a solid finisher. I actually enjoy that type of Magic card. And of course it's good with infinite mana if it's snow mana. You're just straight up killing people. No, in 1v1, even if this thing is 100/100, it is a trigger for whenever. So if you do deal combat damage to the player, they'll die as a state-based effect. So you just want to make sure you actually do lethal, and then you don't end up drawing the 100 cards because the game is over. Augury Raven, 4 mana for a 3/3, but it's got that foretold, so you can actually do 2 low installments of 2 mana each, and that seems like a great option. Cards like Ascendant Spirit and Augury Raven do seem like they're going to make the limited format pretty fun, as you're going to have mana sinks, which is one of the more important parts of playing in a pre-release or just draft. Anytime you're playing a limited format, making sure you get the best use of your mana is really important, and it can be frustrating at times when you just don't have anything to do with the mana. It's a really tense board state. You've kind of done everything you can do to stabilize, and then you draw a land for turn, and now you just start falling behind. Whereas with these type of cards, you can potentially use mana sinks, Boast, Foretell, and then activated abilities to at least have some options what to do with your mana. Either play cards from your hand or just continue using the cards that are actually on the battlefield. Also is nice in that you don't have to walk right in and overcommit. If you are using Boast and other abilities, then you're not necessarily having to overcommit to get blown out by a board sweeper, for example. Avalanche Caller, a 2 mana 1/3, and you can pay 2 to make target snowland you control a 4/4 creature with hexproof and haste until end of turn. That's a pretty dangerous card. Now, the snowlands are going to be in somewhat short supply. Those you cannot just play with as many snowlands as you want in your pre-release pool. Snowlands are not actually island, swamp, mountain, plains, forest, where you can just play as many as you want. My understanding, and I can't imagine they'd change this for this, as they've already done multiple events like this. Whatever you happen to get for snowlands is what you're able to use. And I mean, this just seems like a really dangerous effect for limited. Just being able to turn your lands into 4/4s that also have hexproof is very, very strong. Behold the Multiverse, 4 mana instant, scry 2, then draw 2 cards, and you can also, again, go with those 2 low payments of 2 mana, and I mean, that's fine. I mean, the 4 mana for the effect is playable. Like 4 mana instant, draw 2, inspiration. That's a thing that we've played before without holding our nose too much, but getting the scry out of it is significantly stronger, and being able to potentially just fit this in at different times Now, the foretell you have to do on your turn, but the fact that this is an instant, you can just fire it off during an opponent's end step and not necessarily find yourself as vulnerable. Bergstrider, 4 in a blue for a 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls, and if snow mana was spent to cast it, that permanent doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. A 4/4 giant wizard version of, what is it, Frostlinks, I think was there was a 2/2 for 3 in the past, which was totally playable, was absolutely the type of thing where you'd end up with a few copies of that and be very happy about it. I'm not sure how the higher costs will play into this. A lot of the time those cards, I mean, it seems like it's going to be fine. Like, just on the surface, that is not a creature that I'd be embarrassed playing. It's kind of mid-rangey. In general, the hierarchy for quality creatures, we're talking about creatures that kill other creatures, are ideal, and this kind of does that. It does potentially remove a creature from combat for a turn or two, and that is, I think that's actually pretty strong. Bind the Monster, one of my favorite stories in Norse mythology with Fenris Wolf and Tyr. He actually put his hand into the wolf's mouth to get it to accept the binding that had been made by the dwarves, and just a really, really cool moment in Norse mythology. One of the tales that really had me falling in love with that whole pantheon and their stories. So, enchant creature. When Bind the Monster enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. It deals damage to you equal to its power, and it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So that is just super flavorful. So basically, one of Loki's children, Fenris Wolf, was going to be part of Ragnarok. So the gods knew this, and they were going to bind it. So they had the dwarves create all of these powerful chains and magical things to try and contain the animal, and he just continually would just let them try and bind him, and he would just shatter the shackles, no problem. Finally, they came with a golden rope, a very thin, fine golden rope, and he was very suspicious of it, and he said he'd only let them attempt to bind him if one of them would put their hand in his mouth, and they did bind him, and he did try and break it, and he was not able to get out, and he bit off Tyr's arm. Tyr? I'm not actually sure. I guess I haven't talked about Norse mythology very much out loud, but Tyr, I think it's Tyr. But they're kind of covering most of the PG stories, it would seem. Probably not going to do too much with Freya. Brine Barrow Intruder, 1 blue for a 1/2 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, target creature and opponent controls get -2/-0 until end of turn. And that's generally the type of card I'm not going to be super happy playing. It's close, like it's close. I would play it if it was a 2/2 for 2 in a heartbeat, but being a 1/2 means that this thing's probably not going to get there. It gets outclassed in combat very, very quickly. And best case scenario, you do create some type of situation where you win a combat where you're able to, instead of trading in a situation, just kill their creature. But getting the 1/2 body is not that much different than just having played an instant that gives a creature -2/-0, which generally you're not going to be super excited to sleeve up. So that one's close. I mean, if there was something to like continually get ETBs, then maybe there would be an argument for that. We'll see. I could be wrong on that. Pillar of Ice of some sort. This is going to pay a snow mana to tap an artifact or a creature, and this is much better on a creature. Being able to tap down opposing creatures is a type of creature removal, so I would consider playing this card. This will always be able to remove their best creature from combat, and in general, the way you use tap effects is during your opponent's end step, or before their attacks, if they were potentially going to attack you, you can just tap their creature, and then on your turn, it's not there, so you can attack, and then you can just keep tapping on their turn. And that's generally where you want to be with tapping effects. They're really strong when they're on opposing creatures because they can also get in there for damage, but this card's probably going to be playable in your pre-release pool. We've got another god here, Cosima, God of the Voyage. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile Kazima, and if you do, it gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Kazima is exiled, you may put a voyage counter on it. If you don't, return it to the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it and draw X cards, where X is the number of voyage counters on it. So, I mean, most of your rares in this set largely going to be playable, and you're going to kind of just do fun stuff with this. I mean, it's not generally where I want to be, but in a standstill, potentially you could let this build up and then cash in for a significant amount of card advantage. On the other side of this card, we have... Oh, is that not it? And on the back of the card, we've got the Omen Keel. This ship can create some card advantage whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player. That player exiles that many cards from the top of their library, and you may play lands from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. So basically, you're going to hit them, and then you're going to have access to a little pile of lands from your opponent's deck. And, I mean, that's definitely going to be fun for some people. Cosmos Charger, Flying Flash, 4 casting cost, 3/3 flyer. I mean, I am on board with that. Foretelling cards from your hand cost 1 less, and it can be done on any player's turn. That is really, really... that's the type of thing I'd have fun with. And it foretells for 2 in a blue. So, yeah, I mean, I'm on board. Even if you don't have foretell, a 4 casting cost, 3/3 flying flash creature is solid. And I'd expect that that's going to be super playable in your pre-release pools. Cyclone Summoner, 7 casting cost, 7/7. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you return all permanents to their owner's hand except giants, wizards, and lands. So that is kind of like an upheaval effect. Very, very dangerous. That is a card that we've seen with like krakens and sea monsters and stuff in the past, and they can be pretty devastating. Now, keep in mind, changelings are going to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in this, as they will avoid getting returned. So it won't be a completely clean sweep versus many of your opponents. Disdainful Stroke, 1 in a blue, counter target spell with converted mana cost 4 or greater. It saw a lot of play in standard constructed during cons, and it may in this case as well, if anyone is actually playing standard. Draugr Thought Thief, a 3 casting cost 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top card of target player's library, and you may put it into their graveyard. So a little bit of a mini Fate Seal situation there, and that's probably fine. 3 casting costs, 3/2s. I mean, they're certainly playable in limited. The fact that they trade down with your 2 casting cost cards is disappointing, but you kind of take what you can get. You do need an early board presence. You can't just build a deck around all of your bombs and expect to actually survive long enough to be casting them. Frost Auger, 1 casting cost 1/2. You can play a snow mana and look at the top card of your library. If it's a snow card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. That's probably going to see some Commander play. Like, I would definitely play that in Commander. There's like a zombie has this guy written all over it. Just a 1 casting cost wizard, which lets you tap to draw a card with her. And yeah, I mean, I had a zombie built for a while, and it was just too good. But I feel like maybe now you can get back into using that card. Now that CEDH is more of a thing. But when I had built it before, I mean, it was just, people were not even having fun. You just like beat like a table of like 4 people, no problem. Just because of how easily you could combo off just a bunch of counter spells and Time Twister, Time Spiral, and all Snowlands, of course. One of my favorite things in Commander back in the day was running Snowlands with Extra Planar Lens, so even other blue mages wouldn't be able to get the bonus from your Extra Planar Lens, as they weren't playing snow covereds, because who the heck spends, $3 a land back in the day? Now Snowlands are at least cheaper, so that tactic won't be quite as much of a play-to-win move. Frostspeaker Yeti, 4 mana, 3/3, and it can become unblockable this turn. Yeah, I mean, he's fine. Definitely can punch through at the end of the game. I'd much rather have flying. A lot of the times, newer players really like unblockable more than flying, because it can't be blocked, and they kind of think, well, that's the whole point of flying. Well, it's kind of the whole point of flying. Being evasive is strong, but the other part of that is also blocking creatures with flying. So when you think about flying, it's really two abilities. It's kind of flying and reach, like the ability to block your opponent's creatures is actually very important, and when things aren't going perfectly, it becomes extremely important. Frost Prior, Anarchist, 5 casting cost, 2/5, and when this spell costs 1 less to cast if you control a giant or a wizard, so you're going to get a little bit of a discount on this, but still not very impressive stats. Let's see what the rest of this is. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for an instant or sorcery with the same name as a card in your graveyard, reveal it and put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So I don't know who they made this card for. Definitely not Commander players, and I can't really think of any constructed formats that are going to be happy about playing a 4-mana 2/5 that is going to be getting a duplicate of a card out of the graveyard. You think about things like accumulated knowledge, but I mean, the formats where you can play that card, the bar is way too high for this guy to be played. Giant's Amulet, 1 blue for an equipment, and it gives a creature +0/+1 and hexproof as long as it's untapped. But you can also pay 4 mana to get a 4/4 blue giant wizard token when you play this. So you're basically paying 5 mana for a 4/5 can't be or hexproof as long as it's untapped, which is totally fine. Totally fine for your pre-release. Giant's Grasp, 4 mana, enchant giant you control. When Giant's Grasp enters the battlefield, gain control of target non-land permanent for as long as Giant's Grasp remains on the battlefield. Man, that's a fun steal effect, a little flavorful. Glimpse the Cosmos, 2 mana sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And as long as you control a giant, you may cast Glimpse the Cosmos from your graveyard by paying blue rather than paying its mana cost. And if you do, you exile it. So that card actually seems very interesting, especially with changelings. I mean, you're not going to generally in Constructed have giants unless you're playing some type of commander deck, but I could see this being a go-to card if there's enough changelings at some point where you're going to have like a ninja deck in Legacy. It's enough of a shell there that people have fun playing it. It's not top tier, but changelings could certainly make good use of this. Being able to cast this and flash it back, that's a really good value for the way the card is printed if you can have a cheap changeling that you're actually happy to have on board. Graven Lore, 5 casting costs, snow instant, scry X, where X is the amount of snow spent, and then draw 3 cards. So I'd imagine some commander players are going to have fun with that. Probably be good enough for standard, and that's about it. I mean, 5 mana to draw 3 cards at instant speed is not the worst by any stretch, and the fact that you could potentially be scrying like 5 first is actually pretty spicy. Scry 5, draw 3 that's some serious digging. So that's probably going to be like amazing in standard if I had to guess, though probably not worth very much. I mean, if it was a mythic, it'd probably be really, really a very different story. That's tough for rares to be worth very much in standard, just in general. Icebreaker Kraken. That is a huge retail cost here. 12 mana for an 8/8, but it costs 1 less for each snowland you control. So I suppose we have a contender for commander already. When it enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures target player controls don't untap during that player's next untap step, and you can return 3 snowlands you control to their owner's hand to return it to its owner's hand. So, I mean, that's actually pretty brutal. I don't think people will have fun playing against this card. But I could definitely see this being like a finisher for control in standard. A long game. This is not going to be that much mana. Snowlands, I mean, you could potentially have like 8 lands out, no problem. And just paying 4 mana for an 8/8. I mean, it's pretty strong. Kind of reminds me of Hearthstone. There are a bunch of giants in Hearthstone that are like 8/8s that under the right conditions end up costing like 0 mana, and this has a little bit of a feel like that where you're just able to cast a 2 casting cost 8/8 because you've dragged the game out indefinitely. Inga Rune Eyes, 4 casting, costs 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, scry 3. And when it dies, draw 3 cards if 3 or more creatures died this turn. That's an interesting card. I mean, drawing 3 cards for 4 is great, and the scrying's nice. I mean, it does give you a little bit of a hedge against board wipe, so I mean that's an interesting Magic card. I don't know that you actually need to force that in Limited, but you could definitely have that as insurance against whatever type of sweepers they have, and also create some pretty complicated attack steps. Carfell Harbinger, 2 casting costs, 1/3, taps to add a blue that can be cast, can only be used for foretelling or casting an instant or sorcery. I mean, it's an interesting choice to give blue mana dork like that. It is a wizard. Again, that could be a card that Azami plays. I think we had like Apprentice Wizard or something in that deck, but that's also better with like Mind Over Matter because it actually ramps mana. Litjarrah Kinseeker, 4 casting, cost 2/4. Here we've got a Changeling, and that's really fun the way they've set the 9 realms up. I think they did 9. I'm not sure. Maybe they did more. Should be 9. When it enters the battlefield, if you control 3 or more creatures that share a creature type, put a +1/+1 counter on this, and then scry 1. So, I mean, if you're in the Changeling motif, it's going to be really strong. 3/5 for 4 is pretty much where you want to be out of your commons. That's just a good solid beater that's going to outclass any of those early plays. Mist of Litjarrah, flash, enchant a vehicle or creature. Enchanted creature gets -3/-0. Not exactly the type of removal I'm generally happy to be playing. It's kind of situational. I mean, usually there's just better removal than this. Best case scenario, you make a creature die in combat, and worst case scenario, they end up, bouncing their creature relatively easily with some effect that doesn't waste an entire card, and now you are down a card in the matchup. All right, we've got another Changeling with flying. You can pay 2 to give it +1/+1 till end of turn. So, nice with infinite mana. Watch out for this one in Type 4. And, I mean, 3 mana for a 1/4, that's a pretty big butt. I'm not going to lie. It's +1/-1. There we go. I was going to say, like, if you could just, like, fire breathing this, so not good with infinite mana. +1/-1. So this can do at most 4 damage without additional help, and it's probably somewhat playable. I usually like to get like 2 damage or more out of my flyers, so the fact that you have to keep sinking mana into this, not the best, but I mean, they can't all be home runs. Mystic Reflection, 2 mana, and this is a card that people have been talking about. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalker enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature, and it also has foretell of only 1 blue, making it pretty easy to set up, so people are going to have all sorts of fun with this one. Mostly a goofy card, but, people will have a good time. And also, the thing about foretell, like, it does give extra utility to Lion's Eye Diamond, mostly in Commander. I don't think we're going to see a lot of stuff in Legacy, which is going to be worthy of using Lion's Eye Diamond for, but the fact that you can just use LED just similarly to, like, your command zone, just use the mana to just cast this thing from a zone that's not your hand, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm kind of looking at all of these, checking to see if there is going to be something where it's just like, wow, like that's ridiculous with LED. But that is something to keep in mind. Orvar, the All Form, a legendary shapeshifter. He is a changeling. Now, originally, Legend used to be an actual creature type. They changed that to be a super type. So yeah, it used to be Legends and Walls had special text associated with them, but they've kind of streamlined the rules and made things simpler to make sure that creature types don't actually matter except for their interactions with other cards. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets 1 or more permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And then whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard a card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. So, I mean, that is good at setting boundaries. If your opponent's trying to actually make you discard cards, they're going to have a bad time. And you're going to be able to also use your buff spells to create copies of stuff. I mean, that's got EDH written all over it, in my opinion. How good it'll actually be, that is unclear, but Commander really isn't about actually being good so much as doing really fun things, and this looks like people will have fun with it. Pilfering Hawk, a flyer that you can pay a snow mana to loot. I mean, that kind of does a lot of stuff badly, but it does a lot of stuff. It's a flyer for only 2 mana, but it's only got 1 power, but you can also loot with it, and looting is one of the best things that you can do in Limited. Just the ability to, as you play your lands out, once you have enough lands for your deck to function smoothly, a card like Pilfering Hawk now is draw a card and then discard a dead land card, and that could be really strong. So, you know, it's not likely that we're going to be using this to discard reanimation targets when we're talking about a pre-release. Generally, those looting effects are just really good at creating a higher quality selection in your hand. Raven form, I can't believe how many people got really worked up over this one. So 2 and a blue, exile an artifact or a creature, and then they get a 1/1 bird token. Foretells for only a blue, which makes it feel a little Swords to Plowshares-ish, but I mean, you did pay 2 mana during your turn in order to get that discount. So you're basically paying 3 mana to exile an artifact or creature and giving them a 1/1. And, you know, it feels a little reminiscent of Beast Within or the new Elephant one from Modern Horizons. Also has a little bit of a feel of Pongify and Rapid Hybridization. And, you know, it's common. I mean, this is actually a card that seems like it's a consideration for whether or not it would be playable in Pauper. The bar is actually pretty high for that format. We did have the Blue Monarch card get banned. I mean, that was not super shocking. But yeah, giving Blue Monarch is pretty rough. Reflections of Litjarrah. 5 casting costs. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever you cast a spell of the chosen type, copy that spell. All right. So it got the little reminder text. Copy of a permanent spell becomes a token. Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun for Commander. You're basically doubling up on all of your extra spells. Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can use that. I don't know how many of them are worth an initial investment of 5 mana in a card, but in Commander, that's exactly the type of stuff people are going to have fun with. Not sure I'd ever play that in Limited. I mean, it'd be fun, but it's also going to be miserable when it doesn't work. Run Ashore, 6 casting costs. Choose one or both. The look of this already makes me feel like it's going to win. I haven't even looked at the text yet. The owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library and return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So you're going to ruin people's day with this one. So you're basically getting 2 permanents off of the board. Non-land, you're talking about creatures anyways because this is pre-release. One of them's going into their hand. One of them's going on top of their library. Maybe it goes on the bottom. But more often than not, you're going to deny them that extra card draw, making them draw that same card again. And yeah, that's going to be brutal. There's a lot of like 6 casting cost cards that like return 3 creatures and stuff. Those generally just like straight up win the game when we're talking about Limited. So I think this one's brutal. The fact that it's instant speed, I think this one's going to be absolutely soul crushing in pre-releases. It is expensive, but man, like that is a really bothersome effect that can handle creatures of just about any quality. Just getting them out of there for a turn so you can actually wrap things up. Rune of Flight. We've got a whole cycle of runes. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and this one gives the creature flying. And as long as the enchanted, it either gives a creature flying or gives the equipment the ability to give creatures flying. So you're basically making a mark of flying and drawing a card. And I think this card's totally fine. For Limited, getting it on a piece of equipment could potentially be a great value depending on your equipment. Giving things wings can be very strong. It's one of the better abilities that a creature can have, and the fact that this draws a card makes it relatively low investment here. I mean, you're paying 2 mana to get a card right out of it, and you're also looking at giving things wings. If you have to slap it on a creature, you just hope that they don't kill it in response. But if you do get it on a piece of equipment, then that could end up making a big difference over the course of a game. Getting like big creatures flying is very disruptive to the typical way that those battles go. When you just have like a gigantic flyer, it can pretty much swing fearlessly, and it can be really tough to catch up. And when you go to pump the brakes, it really just stops everything, because they can't really do anything like swinging into you with their little creatures when you can just give one of your fatties some wings. Saw it coming. For 3 mana, we've got a counter spell, but it foretells, so we can actually have a 1 and a blue for a counter spell. And I mean, that's not the type of thing that I generally play at my pre-release pool. I actually don't usually love counterspells in Limited. I love playing counterspells in Constructed Magic. I've played all manner of control decks. Mana Drain's one of my favorite cards. That said, in pre-release pools, generally, if you are keeping mana open, you don't have enough quality mana sinks to make that worthwhile. So it's not like you're sitting in a control matchup where you've got some counter spells and you say go, and if your opponent plays stuff, you deny it, and then when whatever mana you have left over, you draw some cards and you keep that party going. Instead, generally, you're just kind of passing the turn with mana open repeatedly, which is falling behind, or you're not keeping mana open, and then this card doesn't end up having a ton of utility. So the fact that you can potentially get a 2 mana counter out of it, I mean, it's certainly better than like a 3 or 4 mana counter without that ability, but I don't think this is the type of thing that I would willingly sleeve up in my pre-release pool. Strategic Planning, a reprint from Portal 3 Kingdoms card that they've just continued to hammer. This thing was worth a ton of money when it was only in P3K, and now we're just getting it repeatedly at common, just in random sets. So fun art. Strategic Planning here, you're going to look at the top 3 cards of your library, 1 into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. And that actually did see play in Vintage at one point. Wow, it's really coming down out there. I think the Kaldheim spoilers are bringing out the snow. Winter is coming. Surtland Elementalist, 7 casting costs, 8/8. You can, as an additional cost to cast this, you can reveal a giant from your hand or pay 2. So it's going to be 9 mana or reveal a giant. And when it attacks, you can cast an instant or sorcery from your hand without paying its mana cost. That's fun. Probably not going to be using this in Omnitel or Sneak and Show or anything. But you know what? It's a big goofy creature, and that is fun. The fact that you have to pay an extra 2 or reveal a giant does actually make it harder to abuse. If you're like casting it off of an Omniscience or something, it's significantly worse. But yeah, I'd expect Commander players to find a way to have fun with this. Every time it attacks, casting an instant or sorcery without paying its mana cost could provide some significant additional value, and probably a bunch of ways of taking extra turns with that. If you can just keep recurring a Time Warp and just casting it for free, sure. Undersea Invader, 6 casting costs for a 5/6, enters the battlefield tapped, but it has flash. And, that's the type of thing that makes counterspells certainly better. If you're able to make some impactful end-of-turn plays, then something like this can potentially make it worthwhile keeping that mana open. And that is it for blue cards. So let me know what you guys think about these videos. I'm going to try shooting with a different camera for the next one. We'll see how that goes. But we will get through all of Kaldheim as I discover this set with you guys. And hopefully we'll have a solid pre-release turnout. And let me know if you guys want to do a release weekend. We can actually get the product to people in time to do a release weekend. We could do that with the viewers if you guys are down for that. The following weekend, basically the weekend that Kaldheim actually comes out, not the pre-release, but the release, we could do a big release tournament with viewers of the channel. If that's something that you're interested in, let me know.